signed up for the public forum portion of the agenda. One of the speakers wants to address us relative to the capital improvements plan that's proposed for the Metropolitan Airports Commission. And so Dave Schultz, who is a resident of West Lakeland Township, would you want to come forward, please? And you'll have 3 minutes, Mr. Schultz.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you. I'm Dave Schultz. I'm on the Board of Supervisors for West Lakeland Township. And this is concerning Ken. I would like to address several issues regarding the proposed Lake Elmo Airport expansion improvements. I understand that MAC does not consider this an expansion as it will remain on their 640 acres, but the airport role will change as the runways will be extended and the type of aircraft MAC wishes to attract. Two issues that rank high with the MAC Council regarding MAC airports is connecting to sewer and water and zoning. The Met Council stated in a document dated November 16, 1998, that future long-term comp plans would not be approved if the MAC did not address sewer and water. Currently, Lake Elmo does not have either. And the MAC is just in the early stages of creating a joint zoning board today. West Lakeland Township takes exception to the Met Council's approval of the 2035 long-term comp plan regarding improvements at Lake Elmo. First, the three surrounding communities have objected and opposed the airport runway extensions via their respective comp plans, all which were approved by the Met Council. In addition, there are two resolutions in opposition from two communities on the expansion of Lake Elmo. And then why was Lake Elmo, when Lake Elmo opposed the Gateway Corridor Gold Line, did the Met Council remove Lake Elmo from the transportation plan, resulting in this change of route and ultimate endpoint? Yet approved the Lake Elmo Airport runway expansion with disregard to the resolutions. Stormwater management has been a large concern with Valley Branch Watershed District and the Watershed Conservation District. MAC's response to date is, we will mitigate it as we go. This is not acceptable. How is stormwater runoff on 12.5 acres of new impervious surface going to be addressed? 30th Street concerns are multiple. First, West Lakeland Township's hydrologist had a concern regarding the road shoulders were they included in the design to accommodate the 25-foot wetland buffer. Second, the 30th Street realignment runs through a 100-year floodplain and also skirts a designated DNR wetland. It's also that there are very extremely poor soils in constructing a road in this area. In consulting with a registered professional engineer, the comment, given an alternative, one would not construct a road in the proposed area MAC is proposing. In addition to MAC's proposed realignment of 30th Street, it does not meet MnDOT design standards according to this engineer. 30th Street is a municipal boundary between Baytown and West Lakeland Township. Road maintenance is currently shared between the two. Maintenance of the newly relocated 30th Street would be the sole responsibility of West Lakeland Township. While Baytown is offered to continue to share the maintenance costs with West Lakeland, the municipal boundary would have to change. That constitutes forced annexation on the part of MAC, which they do not have the authority to do. While there's no tax implication here, it would be setting a precedent. Moving the road is predicated on both townships relinquishing the ownership of their prescriptive road right-of-way. If for whatever reason, one or both townships do not relinquish the right-of-way, MAC has the authority to condemn the road and take ownership by eminent domain. In doing so, MAC would have to compensate the townships financially for the road. There's understanding that MAC would not be able to use federal funds to construct the replacement road after closing the eminent domain. That being the case, MAC were to condemn the road, it would essentially be vacated. MAC does not have that authority. Only municipalities have that authority. There are several airports in the East Metro that have longer runways, more capabilities, amenities that are underutilized, such as St. Paul, South St. Paul, and the Richmond. From the beginning, we've questioned, researched, and challenged the ability of this plan. This is not my backyard NIMBY issue. We've brought forth valid technical environmental concerns, none of which we believe have been fully addressed by MAC, and we feel that they have failed to adequately defend their purpose and need to support the purpose of this airport changes. In conclusion, I ask this body and the Met Council to hit the pause button, carefully review the information presented in the 2035 long-term comp plan and the environmental assessment worksheet, and ask questions and search out for an independent source for answers. It is our intention that the path fails to take and provide a cost benefit both for the aviation and local communities and does not fully justify the expenditure of the improvements. Thank you.
Mr. Schultz, bear with me a moment. Would you tell us succinctly then, in conclusion, what is it that the township would like in terms of action from the TAB and from the Met Council? You said hit the pause button, but that's
Take and do some research on what's been presented here. There's widely different views on some of the information that's been presented by MAC. Do some research, ask questions.
okay. So do
I'm
you
available for anybody that wants to take and gets more detail. There's been some contentious issues here. And the one I think that's going to involve the legal ownership of 30th Street or the road right-of-ways is going to be a contentious issue. This is a municipal boundary. MAC has never crossed a municipal boundary or proposed moving a road before. This is something that's going to set precedent.
All right. Would you want to leave your written comments with us for the record, and then
can.
we can pass them on to the Met Council as well. If you hand them to Mr. Thompson, he'll make sure they get in the record.
Thank you all.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for appearing before us today, Mr. Schultz. And then there's a gentleman who wishes to appear and talk about transit funding. Normally we wouldn't. I'm going to let you come up here. Normally we wouldn't have somebody speak to something that's otherwise on the agenda today because it's not a public hearing. It's a work session for the TAB. But I know you're here and would like to speak. So, Mr. Hudek, is that correct?
Yes, it is. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
And
My name is Joshua.
3 minutes also, Mr. Hudek.
Okay, I'll be very brief.
you.
My name is Joshua Hodak. I'm representing the 80,000 members and supporters of the Minnesota North Star chapter of the Sierra Club, 2/3 of which reside in the Seven County metro area. We really appreciate your work here at the TAB. I am here to speak in favor of a more transit-heavy funding scenario. Looking at the different funding scenarios for transportation projects, we have a roads heavy in the red, bike and ped heavy in the green. But there's, as we all know, some critical transit projects. Route 6, the orange. I can go on and on about that need funding. So I'm just here to recognize the need for transit funding in that respect, and also just wanted to recognize Metro Transit. Take this opportunity to recognize Metro Transit's electrification plan that I realize is outside of the scope of today, but wanted to recognize the importance of that plan too. So
Right.
That's really all the comments I have, and I really appreciate.
Yeah, you're welcome, Mr. Hodek. Thanks for coming over. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the TAB on a matter of concern to them? All right. Excuse me. We'll move on to the next portion of the agenda, which is the reports. TAB Chair report. We're going to do these recognitions here momentarily, but we had our TAB exec committee meeting downstairs, hour and a half worth of discussion about some of the things that are going to be in front of us today. One of the issues I think that we'll want to be thinking about for the future or for any future solicitation is when we're traveling down the path of having certain draft scenarios in front of us for a couple of months, and then folks start opining from interested agencies, like we just heard Mr. Hodek talk about how he preferred a transit-heavy scenario. Mr. Hollins had submitted information to us yesterday, and then Henneman County submitted to us information this morning on another potential scenario. How do we want to deal with that in the future? There's nothing that in our rules that provides for how we deal with those submissions, and all this information we think is important to have so that we can make a better decision. But should there be something a little bit tighter in terms of process that helps us get to where we want to get, so that when we come to a meeting like this, folks aren't looking at data from on an 11th hour sort of basis. So that's one thing to think about. These funding scenarios, at first downstairs, I would say, with these things that came in kind of late in the game, we were a little bit off-put about how to deal with them. and threw us off rhythm. But we got quickly into the rhythm of it, and I think all of you will today too, as we talk about some of these potential funding scenarios. The goal, I think, should be for us to come back in January with just a couple of different options, and so that we kind of tighten things up today, kind of head in a good direction that we're generally comfortable with, so that we make a decision in January on what the funding will look like for this solicitation cycle for 22-23, that we've got, that we feel comfortable with whatever we've done. So those are just my brief comments from downstairs. Now, this is really, I'd say, bittersweet day. Yeah, actually more sad, more bitter than sweet for me personally. We're losing some tremendous TAB members today, and for a variety of reasons, retirements and other things that are happening. So we're going to recognize each one of them individually. Mary Giuliani Stevens, for those of you who don't know, she is retiring as mayor of Woodbury, and her big party is tonight in recognition of her years of service over in Woodbury, and she's followed on the heels of Bill Hargis and just done a tremendous job growing that community into something that's really special. And it's a delight to go over there. If you haven't been over there for a while, I encourage you to go over there and see some of the development that's occurred. It's just a wonderful, wonderful community. So, Mary Giuliani Stevens, a certificate of appreciation for you, and thank you for your service on the TAB. And I'll see you tonight.
Taking pictures. I don't know. Looks like they're not.
Well, just quickly, thank you for the recognition, Jim. Jim's a friend, besides, as we've co-chaired the regional council mayors and served on other regional bodies together over the years. It's been just a privilege and an honor to have served at the local level for 12 years, and then the last 10 getting involved in regional issues. So it's been a pleasure serving with each and every one of you, getting to know you. I see there's a transition over, but it's going to be nice that so many of you are staying. I hope to take a few months off, and then my heart's in public service, so we'll see where I end up down the road. But I've learned a tremendous amount in the area of transportation. It's a big field, and a lot of that has to do with serving on the TAB. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And then next, Katie Rodriguez, who has been with us for the last 4 years and been such a tremendous asset for the TAB from the Met Council. So for these 4 years of dedicated service, Katie, we've got a small token of our appreciation. And of course, many of you know Katie's moving on to be the city manager of Richfield.
Yeah.
And right next door to Edina. And we're trying to get a breakfast or a lunch set up with her new mayor as well and our city manager. So all the best to you. And if you have some comments you want to make, please feel free to do so. She's already in city manager mode downstairs. She had her calculator out. She's trying to figure out scenarios. And if you do this and you do that, here's what can happen. So,
thank you.
Katie.
I'm not good at goodbyes. I already had like a weepy 10 minutes at Met Council, but I will say it has been an honor to serve with all of you. I think so highly of the Transportation Advisory Board. I think we do great work. I think I was talking to a member earlier and they said, this is democracy. This is like one of the best examples of democracy. Mm-hmm. And I really do think that's true. So really, thank you for the pleasure and the honor of serving with all of you. Nice. And I think one of the reasons we're so collegial is because, boy, you can't disagree very much because we're so tight in this room. So anyway, thank you to Chair Hovland. I think you have been just a terrific leader on all accounts. So thank you.
Yeah, you were so... You might have sharp elbows, but you can't even use them here. That's what you're getting at. Scott McBride, 10 years of service. Lenny must have already moved on. I don't know what happened, but if you wouldn't mind, I would pass this on to you. And he's just been, I think, too, a terrific representative for MnDOT over the years, has provided us with a lot of wisdom. So, thank you. I don't know if you want to say anything on behalf of Scott. Yeah, thank you.
I think he's had shoulder surgery is what
Oh.
also that he's doing.
He's had some kind of orthopedic surgery, apparently.
He's going to private sector.
Recovery mode. He's been seen, so we know he's doing well.
Good.
But we're so sad at Metro District. I mean, we've been fortunate over the past 10 years to have him as our leader and champion. He's been an important member here at TAB, helping to form regional partnerships and collaborations and the progress that we've made. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks, Lynn.
Thanks to Scott. And give him our best. So, where's Denny? Oh, there he is. Denny Laufenberger, Mayor Denny Laufenberger, has been with us for 4 years. And I think just been so thoughtful and so wise in everything that he's done here. Should we head over to him? Okay.
Yeah.
Right there.
He knows how to do pictures.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Get the box.
we're really going to miss Denny as well. He's also been in some other organizations that our city is in, and just a wonderful, wonderful person. And as I said, so thoughtful, so wise. We're really going to miss the wisdom around here, and we wish you the best. Thank you very much. I will say, Denny talked, he has indicated today he's going to apply for the Met Council. So to the extent anybody wants to
Oh, there
support
we
him
go.
Good job.
in his district,
Yay.
let him know.
Thank you,
All
Jim.
right.
I'll speak from here. I don't have a microphone there anyway. One of the most valuable things for me has been to see that the passion that each of us have for transportation doesn't have to be localized. When we enter this room, we sort of take off the hat that we have for our local Highway 5 in Chanhassen, and we think of the big picture. I want to say special thanks to Randy Maluchnik, who as Carver County Commissioner encouraged me to participate in TAB. And to Jim, I want to echo what Katie said, that your leadership is not only worthwhile for us, but it's also been an example for me. So thank you for your leadership and for welcoming
Thanks,
me.
Denny.
And I especially appreciate all of the friendships that I've gained. These are people, you are people that I would not have known. And when I retired from gainful employment 8 years ago, I never thought that I'd have the opportunity to have a fire lit in me for public service, as Mary Stevens has indicated. So I hope that you'll see me in the future. Thank you very much.
Then we've got Brad Tampy close at hand here. Brad, congratulations. Thank you for your years of service. 3 years of service on the tab.
Oh, wow.
And here, I guess we want to.
Yeah, you want a photo? Yeah, let's get a photo.
You're becoming the
I'm a
photographer.
Remind me to send these to you. That's great. Okay, thanks.
And Brad and I have known each other since he was the mayor of Shakopee, and did a terrific job as mayor. And now he's going to the legislature, and he's going to be just a wonderful transportation ally for us over there and for the council. I think he'll do just a marvelous job there. So thanks again for your years.
I don't really have anything more to say. It's been a wonderful group of people to get to know. It's been 3 years now since I was mayor, and it's been great to transition from that to learning everything that this group does and getting to participate in the process and be part of all the great work that gets done here. So now get sworn in on January 8th. So after that, everyone is more than welcome to come visit me. 377 is where I'll be in the state office building, and so I'm looking forward to that next chapter. So thank you, Jim.
All right, thanks for that. And our last departing member has been so valuable to us as well as Ethan Foley, and couldn't be with us today, but we'll make sure that he gets this. And he was a wonderful representative for his industry, and I think serving well at the city of St. Paul or Minneapolis.
He's in
Minneapolis. All right, good. So thanks to Ethan. Yeah, I don't know if Kevin will see him or not.
Do you see him?
Yeah. We give this to you, Kevin? Sure. You give it to him. All right. Lynn, did you have anything that you wanted to report on? Oh, wait a minute. I've got one more thing on the executive committee membership. Elaine, are you getting some inquiries?
I've received a few.
All right. So December 31st is the cutoff. If you want to serve on tab exec, please let Elaine know. I would encourage anybody to that has interest to make applications so we have some good choices there. And then I think on to agency reports. And Lynn, anything to report from MnDOT?
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, as many of you know, we're on the cusp of a world that includes connected and automated vehicles. We're expecting innovation across the region, and we don't really know what that future looks like. And so I want you to have a heads up, watch your mailbox. You'll be getting a letter invitation from Scott McBride. We're working in collaboration with the Metro Council staff and are going to be holding scenario planning workshops in late January and also in April, just to explore alternative futures dealing with connected and automated vehicles.
Good, thank you.
That's good.
Member Buwen, anything from MPCA?
Leaving McCollum.
Yeah, a couple things. Should I?
I mean, he's leaving MnDOT. I think he's leaving. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. A couple things that I want you to look out for over the next few weeks from the MPCA. We are required by the legislature to release 2 reports biannually, and we're going to be doing that. These reports will be on our website by January 1st. And I want to just remind you of that. One of them is called the Air We Breathe report. And both of these reports have relevance to transportation because of the emissions that come from vehicles and from other transportation sources that impact air quality. The Air We Breathe report is really a summary review of emissions, where they come from all sectors, and then how that impacts air quality. The second report is on greenhouse gas emissions. And this is a comprehensive look at where greenhouse gas emissions are coming from all sectors. And it's up through 2016, which is the most recent data that we're able to compile. It does show that transportation has become the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Minnesota, which has overtaken the electricity generation sector over the last couple of years. And that the trend really for electricity generation is down, where transportation is fairly flat. So we've got good data, good charts in this report. Again, they'll be on our website by January 1st. And the last thing I wanted to mention is just that with regard to the VW settlement dollars, we are going to be announcing through a media event here in January. We'll be announcing the first grants that we'll be awarding. So that'll be, and then 2019 will be a year where we continue to dole out the money, so to speak, from that VW settlement. Anything?
Right, good. Questions for Member Buwen at all? Should the tab be applying for any of that Volkswagen money, or beyond that?
Seems that way.
The additional dollars.
No. And then Member Crimmins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As far as the MAC, if anybody's been visiting the airport, you'll see there's walls coming down. There's new concessions opening, but now there's going to be new walls going up where some of the older ones are going to be starting. So it's changing, it's evolving, but it seems to be ongoing. And then over the holidays and the Thanksgiving holidays, we were seeing roughly somewhere between 40 and 46,000 passengers on the heavy days. And TSA was geared up for it. They brought people in to help from surrounding areas to help with moving the passengers through. And it seemed like the lines went pretty smooth. So we haven't heard a lot of complaints about backups. But we still suggest anybody go on the MAC website, because if there is a backup, it's going to be posted there. Mm-hmm. So before you even come to the airport, you can see what the wait times are to go through security. So that helps you gear your travel. That's all I have today.
That's good. Questions for Member Crimmins about the MAC? All right. And then Metropolitan Council Member Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I introduced my news, so I'm good. Thank you.
Right, good. All right, that completes the reports portion of the agenda. We have some minutes in front of us. Did anyone see any thing they wanted to correct in the minutes? Otherwise, I entertain a motion to adopt the minutes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
There is one correction on the minutes on page 4, under item 3. The paragraph that begins, Rodriguez shared her excitement. The 5th line down, it says, considering mass transit overseas. I think that should be options, considering mass transit options. It's Mr. Look's statement.
All right, good. With that change, that correction, would you care to move the minutes, Commissioner?
Sure.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Motion second to approve the minutes as corrected. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, they're still searching. Maybe you have your copy marked?
Yeah.
They're searching for it.
Proposed.
All right, we've got 7 items on the consent agenda. Is there anyone on the tab that wishes to remove an item from the consent agenda? If not, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda as shown.
So moved.
Got a motion second to adopt the consent agenda as shown. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And then on to non-consent agenda items, and Lisa Fries, our TAC chair, is with us today.
Good afternoon. The first item that is a Streamlined Tip Amendment. It's dash 2019 amendment for the I-94 Bridge Ramp Rehabilitation Project. This is funded through the National Highway Performance Program federal funds, and so it's not any of the funds that are regionally distributed through the tab, and so that's why it's in a Streamlined Tip Amendment process. It's for the westbound exit ramp, eastbound entrance ramp over the light rail line over in Minneapolis, 17th Avenue, and the Hiawatha Bike Trail. The cost increase is due to the just additional costs in the project. It's not due to any scope changes, and it's shown in your item here. So with that, I'll entertain any questions if you have.
Question for Chair Fries regarding 2018-53. All right. Is there a motion to adopt the recommended action on 2018-53?
So move.
Got a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Member Swanson. Yes. What?
Obviously, it was me. The consent was.
Does anybody remember who seconded the consent
Consent.
agenda?
Rolf.
Rolf?
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Member Parsons. All right, we got a motion and a second on 2018-53. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. And then on to 2018-61. Chair Fries.
Okay, this is also a Streamlined Tip Amendment. Metro Transit is requesting this amendment because it was awarded Section 5339 discretionary funds from the Federal Transit Administration for the Metro Transit Haywood bus garage in Minneapolis. The bus garage will provide additional bus storage, operations, and support and maintenance functions to support continued ridership demand and upcoming service expansion of Metro Transit. This funding represents part of the cost associated with construction of the new bus garage, which is projected to grow by 185 buses by 2032. And that includes electric buses that are supporting the service expansion. This funding supplements funding that was received for this project in the 2016 regional solicitation.
So it adds funding to the Minneapolis Garage project, money that came from a federal grant. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Questions for Chair Fries on 2018-61? Is there a motion to adopt 2018-61?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we've got a motion and a second to adopt Action Transmittal 2018-61. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Well, the enthusiasm is ebbing here.
Bottled it up.
Everybody's starting to think about the
Yeah.
of all the funding scenarios. Everybody's
Visions of
transportation
sugar plums.
Rubik's cube is running through your brain. All right, our last action transmittal matter is 2018-54, which is the item that Township Member Schultz addressed, and I think we've got Russ Owen here with us to answer some questions. And Chair Freeze, would you want to take this on first?
Yes. This is the MAC request of their annual update to their 2019 through 2025 CIP. It's a requirement for them under the state law, Minnesota Statutes 473.81 and .621. In this particular case, the council each year, the Metropolitan Council each year needs to review the MAC's capital improvements program and determine adequacy of the public participation process of their CIP, approval of CIP projects that meet a certain dollar threshold, $5 million at MSP and $2 million at the reliever airports, and the significant effects criteria. And they also need to review and comment on all projects for consistency with the transportation policy plan, including planning and environmental concerns. This CIP document that was included in your packet is kind of a work in progress, and at this point it'll come together at the Metropolitan Council in its final form. There's been some adjustments and changes in the project schedule throughout the last couple of months due to changing priorities in the program. There were 21 projects that have been moved throughout the years and updating the draft CIP to the final CIP. Many of these projects have been moved to years in the 2022 to 2025 timeframe. There were 3 projects that got moved to 2020, the 2020 to 2021 timeframe. These projects included Concourse G, Delta Sky Club, the air handling units, and the Lake Elmo modification that was presented or talked about in the comments. There has been 1 project added in 2019. In the 2019 schedule that was not previously in the capital improvements program. That's for a hangar for Sun Country. That project will allow Sun Country to consolidate their headquarters, maybe from another site in Egan to the MSP campus. That project is approximately $5.4 million, and even though it meets that dollar threshold, it does not meet that significant effects criteria that would trigger additional review. The CIP itself does not require formal action by the TAB, but because of its relationship to the TPP, you're asked to comment and provide your recommendations to the council. And both Russ Owen and Bridget Reef from MAC are here if you have questions. Russ works for my council. He's the airport's planner.
Yeah, I think we should bring them, at least Russ, forward first, and then Bridget maybe as well. And I think we should have a little bit of insight from our perspective at the Met Council and also from the MAC's perspective on these issues of concern raised by Township Member Schultz. How do we go about dealing with those concerns where he's saying slow down on some of these environmental related issues?
Good afternoon, Chair and board members. From the council's perspective, we're basically just reviewing the CIP. This project, the Lake Elmo project, has been in the CIP. They've gone through the long-term comp plan. They've also gone through the environmental assessment in the last few years. the project reaches a the dollar threshold plus the significance effect criteria to where the Met Council will actually have to approve the project. As we're in relation to Township, West Lakeland Township Supervisor Schultz's comments, the 30th Street relocation road part of the project, I think, is probably the most difficult. The road itself is a major collector road, so it doesn't really involve. It's not a PA, it's not an A minor, so it's not really in the Met Council's purview. So I think hopefully the MAC and Township can come to an agreement with Baytown Township and to figure out how to resolve that issue. I don't know if there's anything else any other information I can provide if you have any questions.
All right, let's bring Ms. Reese up and ask her to comment from the MAC's perspective on the Lake Elmo portion of the capital improvement plan.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Bridget Rafe. I'm Vice President for Planning and Development with the Airports Commission. I've been working on this project all the way through actually the last long-term comprehensive plan that we did for the airport, specific to the road realignment that we're talking about today. The federal environmental assessment and the state environmental assessment worksheet process that we went through, both of them determined that there was no potential for significant impact related to the road relocation. The road as it sits today is on MAC property. There is a prescriptive easement related to the road, but it does sit on MAC property. The relocated road also will sit on MAC property, so there's no acquisition that needs to take place in order to relocate the road. Moving the road provides for civil aviation. It provides an enhanced measure of safety at the airport because we will be clearing our runway protection zones from incompatible land uses, and one of those is this road. And then relocating the road itself too will also provide the township with a brand new road, a replacement for their deteriorating township road. It will be built to current standards, township standards, and will provide equitable access today. So we're not changing any intersections. We're not closing any driveway accesses or anything like that.
All right, good. Questions from members?
Mr. Chair, maybe
Mayor.
just address the other two concerns that were raised, the one being the sewer and water and the other one, the stormwater issues. Could you address those?
Mr. Chair and member, absolutely. So from a stormwater access, we've been working with the Valley Ranch Watershed District for years. Any project that we do that impacts stormwater at our airport needs to be permitted by the Watershed District. We've always worked within their guidelines and within their permit requirements. We will do the same with regard to this project as well. We will be doing a lot of work with regard to stormwater on this particular project. We do have minor wetland impacts that we will also be working with permitting agencies on. And so we will deal with all of those as we get into final design. We don't have any concerns over that. That's just something that we do for all of our projects. With regard to the sewer and water, so when we have an interest in providing sewer and water to our airport. At this point in time, there is no sewer and water access adjacent to our property. There is a new trunk sanitary line within Lake Elmo. It is, as I said, not adjacent to our property. We are working with Washington County on some property acquisition that relates to their Manning Avenue improvements. As part of that project, we worked with them to provide sleeves underneath Manning Avenue for a future sanitary sewer and water connection, should that become accessible for us to actually get to. So that's our position right now. We'd be interested in providing it to our tenants, but at this point in time, we don't have a place to connect to it.
Mr. Chair, just to add on to that, the transportation policy plan does state that most, if possible, the reliever airports and MAC-owned airports provide those services. There's 2 airports right now that don't, Air Lake and Lake Elmo, and those improvements are taken into account and will be provided in the future.
All right.
When possible.
That cause anyone else have quick, Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if I'm hearing the concerns Mr. Schultz had brought about, you addressed some of them, and today we're approving the capital improvement, and anything that needs to be addressed, you'll work with Mr. Schultz, West Lakeland, and the affected parties to resolve things. And I think you've explained some answers today. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and member, yes, thank you. So the next steps for us, once we move forward with our capital program, so our commission approved our capital program just on Monday this week. As we come into 2019 and final design, we need to reach out to the townships to sit down and talk through the roadway issue as far as hopefully being able to negotiate with regard to the prescriptive easement that is in place. We do have, as Mr. Schultz indicated, condemnation authority if we need to go that route. So we're working on valuation, if any, with regard to that road, since we're replacing it, see what value is associated with the existing road. We have also finalized now the members of our joint airport zoning board. We asked the communities to respond to us by Christmas Day, and they all have. So now we can start moving forward with the zoning effort that is part of our Department of Transportation aviation system for state safety zones, and that will be a combined effort with the communities and MAC all being represented on that board.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other inquiries? Thank you both. Stand by in case something surfaces here. So I was just thinking about the presentation from Mr. Schultz on behalf of the West Lakeland Township, and I look at the recommended motion. It says recommend acceptance of the staff analysis of the MAC 2019 through 2025 capital improvement program and forward these comments to the Metropolitan Council for its consideration. I think we could interlineate after the word comments, forward these comments, which would be the staff comments, and the comments of West Lakeland Township to the Metropolitan Council for its consideration. That's our job today, I think, is to entertain whether we want to do that or not. So is there anyone that would care to make that motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right. We've got a motion second to adopt the motion as stated. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. All right, good. Thank you. Thank you. And Chair Freeze, thank you as well.
There it goes.
This is always an interesting document, being able to approve the CIP or recommend approval of the CIP for the MAC is always got interesting projects in it. So we're going to move on to the special agenda items. When Elaine and Nick and I met about a week ago, we decided to separate some of the things to be able to promote probably a more streamlined conversation with respect to these potential funding scenarios. So we thought, well, maybe we should deal with the over-programming issue because staff was recommending that at 8%, but did we want to go to 10%? Discuss the unique projects, which is the St. Paul project on our car. And I'm going to give you a little bit of additional information on that in a moment. And then the decision on the roadway heavy scenario. There's another example of, we had these funding scenarios in front of us, and then all of a sudden one came from TAC. We've never had that in a regional solicitation before, where the TAC has suggested, well, here's another funding scenario for you to consider. So I think that's one of that would fall into the category of process for me in terms of how we want to deal with issues like that in the future. And then we had these two, as I mentioned, came in from Member Hollinshead and from Henneman County, as Henneman County tried to think about how to propose something that was, in their view, potentially good for the region. And so we had that conversation downstairs, and I think it's better that we not take these on a one-off basis. Contrary to what we thought we should do, I think we should have a conversation first. We should have Steve Peterson make a presentation about, I think he's going to use the base as an example of where we are, and then we can talk about some of these issues, and we can talk about, for example, the notion that it would be easy to spend all of this money in sort of a practical application addressing issues of modernization and safety what's the role of innovation in all of this? Do we want to think that even though we could easily spend the money in a practical sort of way, do we still want to be thinking about maybe not spending all the money in addressing all those practical concerns, including safety, but we want to think about innovation or unique projects as well. So I think we're going to benefit more from the sort of broad conversation we had downstairs up here too, because when I started downstairs, I was kind of befuddled as to how to approach this conversation up here. But I think this will work well if we get an example of where we are on a base funding scenario, and then maybe take that Hennepin County proposal and work that against the base, and then talk about some of the other things that we've talked about, which are expansion and roadways. Nobody's really submitted anything on modernization heavy or bike heavy, but with respect to base and expansion and roadways, the emphasis, those are pretty closely aligned in terms of the emphasis of staff to get us to the midpoint. So I think if we transition from a base discussion by Steve Peterson into this document from Hennepin County, it'll flow pretty well, and people will pick up on it right away, and I think it'll lead to a really interesting conversation. So that said, Steve, please.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, we wanted to first put the schedule up. So tomorrow, this will be an action item at TAC funding and programming. That's why there is some urgency to narrow down the options. And even the technical staff said there's too many wide-ranging options and variables for us to give some clear direction back to TAB in January. We need to narrow down the available options. So that's what we're here today to do. And again, these were the action items, and I think I've got them in the right order now. Staff to confirm that, but as the amended agenda was amended. But so the action items today to kind of narrow down the focus for the technical committee starting tomorrow again was first off, whether to include the roadway heavy scenario that is coming to you from TAC as a potential option. Should that be considered with the other four that we currently have? That'll be a decision today. Number two, which of the up to 5 scenarios would you like the technical committees to look at? We're hoping to get down to more of a 2 to 3 out of the 5. So a narrowing down of that. And then thirdly would be the level of overprogramming. So again, we have about $179 million available. Currently in the tables that we've provided to you, we're showing 8% overprogramming. And that's consistent with what we did years ago, was the 8% overprogramming. And that's as projects fall off over the years for various reasons. We have other projects that have some level of certainty and they get going on their project development so that they can quickly backfill and still deliver a federally funded project in time. So the level of how much additional we're going to do. So again, we have 179 million. We're showing about 194 or so in the tables currently, and TAC has proposed a couple different options on what to show. And then lastly, some direction on the City of St. Paul's unique project request for $6.67 million. And there's really 3 parts to that. One is yes, no, would you like to continue to see that in the funding scenarios? Number 2 is at what level if you'd like to see it. And then the third question is where does the money come from? We have to balance the book. So at whatever level, if you do choose to fund that, where does the money come from? Does it come from one mode or off the top, or what projects you'd like to see that come from? So those are the 4 decisions to keep in mind as we go through the tables, but wanted to at least lay that out there as we're going through the presentation today. We've had several questions on how to read this very complicated 11 by 17 multi-page table that the technical committees have looked at for months, so we kind of take for granted that it might be confusing to someone who's just looking at it for the first or second time. And month by month, we've been adding more information. We've gotten more and more requests, so we keep adding additional information and background and tables. So we wanted to take 10 minutes to just go through so you're comfortable reading the table before you have to make any decisions on it. And so each page in here is a separate mode. Again, we have 10 application categories, and the first page is the roadway, the 4 roadway application categories. And the way you read these tables is from top to bottom. So each funding scenario is shown in a different color, and cells that are shown as highlighted in that color. In this case, the base is blue. Every project in roadway expansion that is shown in blue is a project that will be funded under that funding scenario. And so the ones that are maybe just to explain the scenario. So the base scenario, the blue, what you see as the expansion heavy, orange, and the pink, the modernization heavy, they all have the same modal splits. So several people have asked us, well, is expansion heavy meaning we're shifting all the money to roadways? And the answer is no. Roughly the same amount of money is going towards roadways in the base, expansion heavy, and modernization heavy. They're all subsets of the same modal split. It's not where we are shifting money from mode to mode is in the red, which is the roadways heavy. That's about a $9 to $10 million shift from transit to fund more roadway projects. And that was what TAC had proposed as a consideration. And then the green scenario, the bike ped heavy scenario, shifts $9 million from roadways and transit over in the bike ped, and that was at the direction of TAB to come up with that scenario because we did have so many projects that were submitted in the bike ped area. So that shifted about $9 million into bike ped, and we went further down those lists, and we can go through a number of projects, and that accounts for about another 7 or so projects.
Steve, would you go back? I think it'd be helpful too to explain again what what you mean when you use the term the base and what role the base has had in our past 2 solicitations.
Sure. So both in 2014 and 2016, this body approved the base scenario. And what the base scenario is based off is the midpoint of the historic funding ranges. So we look back all the way to 2003 and said, where did TAB put their money? And this was based in part upon the funding sources, CMAQ and the SDP dollars that flowed into it originally. And so the distribution is roughly 58% for roadways, 27% for transit, and 15% for the bicycle pedestrian projects. And so we tried to hit that midpoint, and that works for both the blue scenario, the base, expansion heavy, the orange, and pink, the modernization heavy. All of those try and hit those midpoints, which is the historic funding ranges going back to 2003. So that's where we got that from. So just to go quickly down what the base scenario is, again, this first page is all the roadway categories. And if you look at the first table, roadway expansion, we're showing 8 projects, the first 8 projects, and this is ordered based from the highest ranking score down to the lowest. So we're showing 8 projects in the base funding scenario for roadway expansion that would be funded, and the remainder would not be funded. They'd have a chance to reapply in 2 years. The next category down is roadway modernization. Another separate application category is separate measures and separate scoring committees. And we're showing 7 to 8 projects funded in roadway modernization under the base scenario. This is the yellow, which we'll kind of point to right here. The TAC committee asked us to show what if we move from that 8% over programming to 10%. It gets you another $3 to $4 million. So in this case, $3 to $4 million doesn't get you another full, huge roadway project, but it does provide partial funding. And many of our TAC members said a partial funding on a roadway project would be very beneficial to fill the gap funding on several of those projects that already have various sources that they've compiled to put together to make it happen. So this is just an illustration of where you could put additional over-programming money if you wanted to over-program to a higher level. So then moving down the page to the next category.
Just touch briefly again on this notion of over-programming.
Yeah.
What role over-programming has played historically, and at what percentages?
Sure. So thank you, Mr. Chair. So as far as over-programming, we 2 cycles ago, we did more in the 4 to 5% range. And the reason the technical staff thinks it's a good idea is because oftentimes if we get more money through other states not using their money, too many projects falling out, or a new federal transportation bill, that money is available and a lot of times has to be used right now. And you can't deliver a federally funded project right now. It takes several years. So having projects that are flexible and in the queue, essentially ready to be delivered and working towards that delivery date is very important for us to, as a region, so we don't give money back or have to make quick decisions that aren't funding the highest priorities, I would say, for the region. So it's an important funding tool or strategy that we use. The level of over-programming is open topic for discussion, I think, what the right level is, and we haven't narrowed that down even as a staff level on what that perfect level is. So the risk with doing more and more over-programming is that you're eating into 2 years from now the decision, because if there's not enough money available and projects haven't dropped out, then those projects are asked to delay, and then you're moving from 2023 to the next year, which is 2024. And 2 years from now, this body will be asked to pick projects for 2024 and 2025, and you'll have a reduced amount of projects available if you overprogram by too much and not enough falls out. So that's the risk that you play. But if you think you have good projects available next on the funding list and you want to get those started, then there's some advantages to getting those projects going.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Mayor.
Mr. Chair, Steve, can you tell us in 2014 and 2016 if we had projects that were able to get into that, be in that queue and be funded as a result of being ready from other sources, and where the sources came from?
So over the last 2 cycles, and Lane can correct me if we're wrong, we did have additional money. I think back in 2014, we made a decision in May, and then the next month in June, we had additional money that we had to distribute, and we went further down those lists. And I think we did that again 2 years ago to a smaller extent, where more money came available, and we had a list ready to go, and projects absorbed those.
Okay, so we have done this in the past.
Elaine.
In 2014, we ended up having to find more projects. In 2016, we now have or programming. Only 2 projects dropped out, and so we have now funding coming out of this solicitation, so we have less this time to give out. So that was the risk.
Mr. Chair.
All right. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Elaine, can you say the number of dollars? Steve, you said 179 million, correct? If we didn't have to allow for funding projects that were already over programmed, what would that 779 be? In other words, how many dollars of this solicitation are committed based on previous projects?
Off the top of my head, I'm going to guess about 20 million. That was, I think we overprogrammed like 25, 26 million last time. So very few dropped out, so we're...
So we will be using federal dollars from this solicitation. They're already committed to projects that we decided were programmed 2 years ago.
Yes.
So the overprogramming we do, if we choose to do overprogramming today, we are essentially committing dollars potentially from a future solicitation to pay for the projects that we're earmarking this time around.
Correct.
Okay.
Member Rodriguez, and then Member Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a question, but there's a project that still could drop out.
Correct.
It's not that it's absolutely going to be 20 million. There's still projects that could drop out.
Right.
I think that's why you use the word potential.
Yeah.
Yep. Member Swanson.
Over my 30 years of working with transportation financing, the one thing I've really learned is you benefit by having projects on the table, because the financing is so sporadic.
Yeah.
And what we think is good today, 2 years from now, a sudden drop of money can come in, and those states that have projects ready to go get the money. Those states that don't get the money.
Yeah.
Okay. Member Goins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Lynn was just explaining to me that at MnDOT, the term that they're starting to kind of wean away from overfunding to flexible program level. Flexible program level. I kind of like that. I think that does make some sense. But the second point, and I think back to 179 million, maybe 20 million is from commitments made 2 years ago. This is with the assumption that there are not any other funding sources that could become available. In other words, if we flexible program level it at 8% or 10% or 11%, whatever the percentage is, there is the possibility, if I'm correct, that there are other funding mechanisms, whether it's the TED program through MnDOT or other federal funding that could come in, that could help. And what we're doing then is we're just cataloging projects that we know are valid to our region and we want to move ahead on, whether it's 8%, 10%, or 12%. Is that correct, that there are other funding sources that could possibly come into the equation?
The funding sources could come in, and I think some of the projects that have submitted their applications are hoping to get some of that funding. That would be part of the match.
Sure.
It wouldn't replace the federal funding.
Understand.
Somebody else had their hand up.
Yeah.
It wasn't me though, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for those of us paying attention to the feds, it looks like everybody's in agreement that they want to do infrastructure.
Yes.
I've never seen that much encouragement, and I believe there is going to be an infrastructure, and there's going to be more money from the feds shortly. So I think we will benefit from that in this region.
Good. Thank you.
That's good.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thank you. To continue down the list, this is again in roadways. We have a category called traffic management technologies. These are more the ITS, signal retiming, similar projects. And so in the base scenario, we're showing all three projects funded. And if you look very closely, zoom in a little bit. The last project in there, City Minneapolis, ITS improvements, there's a slight shading. It might be tough to see, but that is meant to, we picked about 2 projects per funding scenario that show the opportunity cost of funding the Our Car unique project versus not funding it. So we wanted to show you the trade-offs there of, it could come out of any one project, several projects. We picked the lowest scoring project. In most cases, it was 2 projects per funding scenario that you would not be able to fund if you fully fund the unique project from Our Car. And again, that's a question that you'll be asked later in this today. Moving down on the bridges, we're showing 3 bridge projects being funded. Again, TAB directed staff in the solicitation process to fund at least $10 million of bridges. We're just above the $10 million mark, and you can see one project we skipped over several towards the bottom here. This is is that a heart? I don't know. Maybe. Viking Boulevard. That is a bridge project that is also a function classified as an A minor connector. These are the rural 2-lane roadways that connect our rural town centers. They have difficulty scoring well in the normal process, and TAB has said they would fund at least one of each of the eligible 5 functional classes. And so the A minor connector is the only one that we'd have to skip over higher ranked projects to get to. And so that's why you see us skipping over some projects to get to the Viking Boulevard project. We thought was a low cost project, $1.4 million. So you're not skipping over a bunch of projects to get to a $7 million project. That's the roadways, and then quickly through the other ones just so I don't shortchange the other modes. Zoom out a little bit here. On the next page, the second page is the transit and travel demand management, TDM. And so in the base scenario, we're showing 6 projects funded. And one thing I thought was interesting on the transit side, and we've had a lot of comments on where the projects are located, who are the sponsors. So we tried to give you some information as to the city and the county in which those projects were located in. I don't know all the transit numbers myself, Route 6, Route this, Route. So even for me, it was very helpful to see where those projects were located across the region and who the sponsors were. So 6 projects in transit expansion, and we're showing on the base 4 projects for transit expansion, 4 projects in transit modernization.
Which one is that?
Am I going too fast, Mr. Chair?
Keep going.
Okay, keep going. And then as we move down that page, there is a set aside for the TMOs and PDMs, and this is consistent with what you have done in the past. And we've provided $5.8 million. That's base level funding for the TMOs in this region. And then $1.2 million is that second line there, and that's will be a set aside that you'll allocate 2 years' time. Those are for those innovative TDM projects. Those are mostly technology projects. They don't want them 4 years out. They want them right now to deliver those new technologies to the region. So we'll hold tight on that $1.2 million if you approve this and allocate those funds to projects 2 years from now. And what you had allocated previously, $1.2 million, is shown here in the TDM funding. So we're funding 5 projects in the innovative TDM category. We have totals up to just over 1.2 million, 1.5 because we did have one of those returned back to us. We reallocated that 300 some thousand, so that's how we get to the 1.5 million dollars and some good projects there. And lastly, on the bike ped, again, we had 3 application categories in bicycle pedestrian. This is on the 3rd page. And the bulk of the money and the projects, we had 40 projects in multi-use trail. Remember the cap that tab set was $5.5 million. The first 3 highest scoring projects were all $5 million plus, so that ate a lot of the money away. And this was something that certainly the technical committees have commented on several times is we didn't get very many projects out of 40. You go down that list and you're only funding 11 of 40 projects, so a quarter of those projects. And it also impacts the other categories because the money runs out quickly. And in pedestrian facilities, we're showing funding for 2 projects in the base scenario, and Safe Routes to School, another 2 projects. And our committees said on both of those, technical committee says, well, it would have been nice to get a little further down those lists. On the Safe Routes to School, we're showing that is the 2 projects right here that are in yellow across the board. Those are collectively, I guess in total, only 500,000. So they're very low cost projects. And even at the TAC level, one of the recommendations was, can we find some way to fund, we can get 2 more projects for $500,000. There's some way we can squeeze that in some fashion to fund those 2 really low cost projects. Okay, that's bicycle and pedestrian. And on unique projects, we are showing the regional travel model. It's funded in all scenarios for $585,000, and that money is coming off the top before we split up the money by mode. And the unique project, again, 6.67 million, or some portion of that, is shown in and out of all the scenarios. So that's what that shading again is. And the last page, and until we get to the action items, shows the distribution by mode. The first table is 8% overprogramming, and the last table is 10% overprogramming. And that was, TAC said, let's see what we can do for 10% overprogramming. And you can see the modal splits. And the one that actually gets the closest to the perfect modal midpoint splits is this 8% and the expansion heavy. You really get down to the percentages, that's the closest expansion heavy. And the base and modernization heavy are both pretty close, they're within, but our TAC members said, well, even 1% here or there is $2 million. So they want us to get to the 0.1% even on some of this funding because they're made a difference for several $100,000. But all 3 of those are pretty close to the modal balance. Again, the roadway heavy, shifting more towards about 62% for roadways, right here. Bike ped heavy on the far side, drops down for both roadways and transit, but then goes to the top of the modal range for bike ped at 20%. Mr. Chair, that's maybe a good time to pause and see if people have questions on just how the tables are set.
All right, Mr. Goins. Member Goins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Steve, just to help for clarity's sake, we'll use one as an example in using in the bike and pedestrian area. So if I look at the first one, help me out here, St. Paul, it looks like that particular project, the federal request was 5.3 mil, is that about right?
Correct.
And it looks like the local match, what was able to be contributed was approximately 3 point, 1.3. So what happens in a project like that as far as there's a big delta? Do they find other funding sources, or does the project go on hold until a later time?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the bicycle pedestrian area, those are mostly an 80-20 split, and that's the requirement for these funds, the 80-20 split. And if you did the math on all these, they're all 80-20. Where you go to not to a different proportion is the roadway side. Those are bigger projects in general, so the match on those sometimes could be 50% or even less on a lot of those bigger roadway projects. And so then once they get funding here, then the roadway projects generally are pursuing other, the TED, like you had mentioned, or federal freight dollars, or and state bonding, any number of sources to try and fill that funding gap.
That's really the solution, more or less, is other funding sources. And I bring this one up only because I think if our goal is to eliminate some of these projects, a long list is great, but getting some of them off is what we really want to accomplish. If we're creating the baseline, which is about a 20% match, and again, this is way out of bounds, but could, like a city, ask other contributors, private parties, to say, look, we'd like you to be recognized as the contributor for this bike path, big sign up or something. And they invest in really trying to nail and get this project up the list. And they, whatever they is, XL Energy, or whoever it might be, gets credit for that, and recognition for that, and helps to complete a project.
Peterson, Lane.
When an applicant applies, the intention is that they have their local match already in line to go with their federal request. Now, the local match can be from their own taxes, other state funds, or private. So we don't tell, they can come up all private if they want. So it's up to them. So that should be already lined up when they apply.
Should be.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair, we've had discussions in the past on, do you somehow bring that into the scoring? There's very few projects that are bringing private sector dollars. Over the years, even on roadways, there's very few that have done it. But I know for the TED funding and others, you are given points essentially if you can bring some private dollars to the thing. So.
Should be an incentive.
Yep.
Excuse me.
All right. So, folks, remember that what accompanies that chart work that Steve was just talking about is this information item that Joe prepared. It says developing funding alternatives for the regional solicitation. And then at the back of that document are the funding solicitation results, the number of applications submitted, and then based on various scenarios by color code on the last page, you'll see potential allocations. So one thing I think it might be helpful to the conversation here is one we had downstairs is if we take that base and we think about the Hennepin County proposal, which was amending the base scenario. Member Reich downstairs had some good observations on it, as did Member Anderson. I'm going to ask them to go next just to kind of guide us through an example of what could occur here in this conversation. So, Member Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I concur. We did have a good conversation, and I think embedded in that proposal, I saw something that wasn't radically unique or a new sort of column, but really a modification of a standing column that we relied on rather successfully in the past, which is our base scenario. And in that, we were able to find some flexibility for some other needs that have been identified. There was strong conversation in our previous meetings about regional balance, particularly a couple of regions that saw their allocations lighter than usual. And we know there's a curve over time, but when you have an extended period, it becomes compelling for all if we have that regional hat. And also to have flexibility for purposes of innovation not just innovation for innovation's sake, but something that actually can contribute by its demonstrated proposal, a regional benefit for a workhorse element of our transportation system. I thought that was a very compelling way to have the base modified for flexibility for end goals that we truly want. And then from my perspective, if I may editorialize, not to search for the best scenario that can capture some unique circumstances in that one given year, but really work off a base and modify it. I just found that very compelling. Certainly a great place to start the conversation as we had an executive committee.
Does everybody have John Q. Doan's memo in front of them? Is Kevin Sack? Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. And then Member Anderson.
Does everybody have it?
What?
Not everybody has it.
Okay, so if you don't have it, raise your hand, please, and we'll get it to you.
Mr. Chair, perhaps as that's being passed out, we did want to note that the overprogramming shown currently in the tables is 8%. So that's the $194 million. It's not the 0% overprogramming. So if you went something less, you'd have to remove some projects to balance the books. So that's one. People have asked us that question. What's shown right now is it's 8% overprogramming.
Okay. Member Wright, you want to finish your comment? Then I'll go to Member Anderson.
Yeah, sir. And I think that reminds me, it does include some sacrifice from proposals. Minneapolis, of course, is implicated in that, and we're aware of that sacrifice in that one line item. But we think it would be perhaps worth it given what the outcome would be for region and also for our own transportation priorities.
You didn't say it.
Okay. Member Anderson first.
I mentioned downstairs that we had some angst over the scenarios coming in late. We took a look at this, and I really had looked at some of these other things like funding our car, and how do we get to, as Kevin said, the funding projects that are looking forward. And we had some significant discussion about how to be a little innovative. And what really struck me though was, if just looking at the numbers, we could come up here and make an easy decision on any scenario. With a proposal like this, we really do get some regional cooperation. I think it's showing us having a little bit of leadership and trying to move the region forward. And I was really buoyed by this cooperation that I saw this proposal bring forward. And it, that's why we're here as a tab, is to take those numbers and certainly use them to the best value we can and bring the most forward. But I think we also have to recognize that we live in a region and there's some give and take, and you have to have some equity and some fairness and really bring everybody to the table.
Commissioner?
Well, may I speak to the Henneman County proposal, which I apologize if it is befuddling to folks. We actually intended to sort of help move the conversation along, and this seemed to be the way to do it, to bring it to this group. So as we thought about the solicitation, I think we kind of went back to basics as a starting point, which is that base scenario has been one that we've used successfully in the past. So it sort of represents, I think, our values as a region. We certainly acknowledge regional equity or balance is important. It's not perfect, but it's something we should strive for. And then in the past, we've looked for some natural point breaks in this scoring, so that there are some places where, as we look at these projects, there's just a natural difference between projects. And as we went through that exercise, it occurred to us that if you took the base project and you added to it the Ramsey County one, number 9, and the Washington County one, number 10, that achieves the goal of some geographic balance. It reflects a natural point break. The next project scores 387 versus 426. So we're not doing a lot of damage to that scoring. But it adds about $6 million. That's rough math. Math is probably more like 6.5 to the problem that we already have. And so Hennepin County is willing to forego the Osseo Road project, which is an important project to us. I want you to be clear that we're not offering it because it doesn't matter. It's an important project. I'm hearing from people just recently about it. We're going to have to figure out some other fixes for it. But in the interest of making this whole process work, we're willing to forego that, working with Minneapolis on that. And Minneapolis has offered to forego the ITS upgrades under traffic management technologies, which is about a $3 million project. We think with those two, and we identified one other which is not ours, so that's a little audacious on our part. but we could get to some funding for our car as well, so that it wouldn't be the full 6 point whatever, but there'd be enough funding to have that demonstration take place. And I think we sort of met the interests of the region, also the interests of innovation, and as Doug said, demonstrate some cooperation. So that's the proposal that we put out fairly late today.
Mr. Chair?
Mayor.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I really appreciate the conversation that we had downstairs, and I appreciate the honoring of the base and how that has been effective for us over the last several solicitations. I also believe in BRT innovation, and we want to see more of that in our region. I love the idea of thinking of this tab reflecting innovation and moving us into our future. I do believe that that's really important, and I love the idea that private industry would support this innovation along with the public. And I offered downstairs the idea, if we honored the base, we took the proposal that it was reflected here in John Doan's memo, and we tweaked it just a little bit, and we thought about the percentages of how did you call it, Lynn? Not over program.
Flexible programming.
Flexible programming. That perhaps the line that would have been eliminated could potentially have at least a partial funding. And so I was hoping that maybe we could have a conversation. And Mr. Chair, are we comfortable about talking about flexible programming dollar percentages at this moment?
I think it's probably good to have it as part of the mix, so if you want to
Finish
your thought.
I'd like to finish my thought with saying that when I first came into thinking about what I was comfortable with, I was thinking 8%. But as I looked at all the options and looking at the base scenario and thinking about in the past, we've had national federal dollars that came to us from other regions. We've had other dollars that have flowed to us from projects that weren't done. So potentially we could maybe go up by 1% on the possibly to 11%. And to think about that and maybe be able to bring some dollars to that one project that I don't know how you got there. You got to that project, but it wouldn't be fully funded, but it could be funded by, Katie, did we say 1.2? I think it was 1.2 million. I think that was a rough ballpark. I think it was actually at the line would have been funded, but for a unique project and would have received 2.744. But I think if we were able to get to 11% flexible programming, we potentially could bring 1.2 to that project, I believe.
Commissioner Ulrich, and
Mr.
then
Chair,
Member Rodriguez.
Want to just add a couple of points on to what Mayor Rowland has said. This BRT Orange Line is a BRT on the 35W corridor, which just was funded, and it's obviously a vital corridor for our region. It's vital that we do all we can to make BRT successful in the region. That's in all our best interests. I've been in communication with MBTA over this in the last hour, and they said they could work with something in the like $1.5 million range. But I do want to quote Mr. Hollinshead on this subject, if I may, in regard to this, because he did send out an email to us, and this is what he said in regard to the Orange Line. The Orange Line itself recently received full funding approval, and the connector will provide 6 miles of enhanced linkage between residents, stores, businesses, jobs, and services for large numbers of low income and communities of color. The proposed improvements would connect the to 9 transit routes at or near the Burnsville Transit Station, including the Metro Orange Line, the 444, the 460, the 495, as well as the 442 routes at the Burnsville Center Mall. Now, for those that don't know, the 495 is a new demonstration project from the Mall of America to northern Scott County to Amazon and so forth, bringing a tremendous amount of employees there. I think one of these other is a connection to Cedar Riverside, bringing a lot of people to employment centers. This is a vital connector that helps make BRT in our region, the Orange Line, successful. So I would speak towards some level of funding, say $1.5 million or something like that. Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I neglected to say, as I just was describing this, that while there are no guarantees in life or in TAB, it'd be helpful to know that the Yasio Road project would be well considered when it comes forward in 2 years. So I would add that. But I would say in terms of MVTA, I looked at the point breaks. Again, that guidance of how do we score. I think those comments are incredibly appropriate, but I also think having had Henneman County and Minneapolis offer up 2 major projects, it's incumbent on some others to come to the table and figure out ways to make this work. So I'm not saying that's the right one, but I may be throwing down a challenge to have other people look at what might be appropriate for them to bring to the table to make this work for the region.
Member Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify because the memo says that it's deferring the Osseo Road reconstruction, and I'm hearing foregoing, and so I just want to clarify.
I mean, I think deferral, again, this is the solicitation we're working on, so if we don't fund it now, unless we guarantee it somehow in the next solicitation with the overprogramming or something, in my world, we're waiting to see what happens in 2 years. But deferral is a better word. I'll certainly take deferral.
Yeah.
You want to finish your thought, Member Rodriguez?
Yes, thank you,
Follow
Mr.
on.
Chair. First of all, I appreciate the effort. I would call this the regionally balanced scenario, and actually maybe even balanced scenario, because I think it's a nice balance regionally, but it's also a balance between roadway and transit and bike ped. I also think it's a balance between our existing needs and also innovative projects. We did discuss the possibility of cutting the hour car funding down from 5.2 to the 4 million, and then 1.2 million going to the MBTA project. And I could also have conversations with our staff to see if there's an additional 300,000 in the Route 6 project, to see if that could be given to get the MBTA project up to 1.5. But in order to guarantee the Osseo project for the next solicitation, that would be over programming at 11%. Just so that's my understanding from staff. They can certainly correct me.
Member Anderson and Member Parsons.
And Commissioner Carlson, and my question downstairs was, could there be an agreement crafted to include the Osseo Road project, but with the caveat that if it was truly an overprogramming, that those funds would not be requested until, so it'd be in the solicitation, but it would be an overprogrammed piece that would be guaranteed, but yet not funded till last.
I think those are all possible. I think it's probably inside baseball for folks in the community who are wanting to know if it's funded or not. But I appreciate the effort to try and figure out ways to make this work, and we're certainly open to those suggestions and comments.
All right, Member Parsons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just make a representation from the citizen's point of view. I don't represent a governmental body, if you will, but I do represent citizens on the east side. And unfortunately, given that we're looking at this through modal lenses, looking at it through different kinds of scenarios, the east side did come out pretty darn short. And, adopting a proposal which would give us that bridge would make a lot of difference in terms of understanding, frankly, why we participate in a regional enterprise.
I think that's a good point, and I think that's one of the efforts that was being made here, was to look at that Bielenberg Bridge and the necessity for it being done as it relates to the Gold Line.
Yeah.
So, Mayor?
Yeah, I'll comment on it. I mean, I think that was part of the discussion when we were looking at the roadway heavy and expansion heavy categories and that discussion that we had at TAB last time. And I could be wrong, but I thought that the category came back from TAC in response to questions we had asked in work we had asked TAC to do to bring it back. It didn't originate in TAC. I think I'm going to just take a different approach. I had more questions about process and how this got here, and I applaud everybody for doing the work, but we seem to have decided we're working off of this as a base than what was brought before us in the agenda. So I have concerns over that, regardless of how we feel about the pieces of it. The other question that I had, as I sat and listened to all the questions and comments last TAB meeting on the hour car, I got the sense that TAB thought maybe it was a little premature. And as much as we support, and I do personally, innovation, and I know that we're going to see that coming down in the future, that perhaps with our fiscal constraints, this was not really a regional project, that maybe it's something that should be funded more locally, and if it proves beneficial, to come back then for funding down the road if it's a regionally significant project. So I feel I'm sensing a huge shift in the discussion and kind of a result of positioning it off of this memo. So those are just some general comments as I look at it. And as I understand the presentation, all of these numbers and projects are based on the overfunding, or whatever we're going to call it now, of 8%. And so the conversation going from 10 to 11 makes some assumptions that aren't in here already. So I'm just going to make those based on kind of what I've heard here, and hope we continue with the discussion. But that's
Those are good points too, and those were points that were brought up downstairs, including the process points. It was I think, determined that for the future we should figure out how to deal with these sort of last minute arrivals. One of the conversations, and it's been missed here, and we had it downstairs, and I think it's important to kind of step back and say, this Hennepin County proposal caused us to have this broad discussion again about, we've got $179 million, we'll assume. We don't know exactly what that amount is, but it would be easy to spend it on a multitude of different ways. And all of those things would deal with expansion, modernization, safety, and to your point, Mayor, where does the innovation come in? Is this something we want to deal with in the future, or do we want to think about it right now? And do we want to say to ourselves as a TAB, okay, we haven't made this determination yet, but it's possible that this hour car proposal offers us a pathway to have and be partners in an innovative project where Excel is paying half the bill. So it's like the region is partnering with Excel, or the city of St. Paul as well as a partner, where and I'll tell you this, that in having a conversation with their chief sustainability officer, he said that $4 million from us would work for the grant, and then that grant would be matched by Excel. And so it's a very unusual private match. I think it's something worth having a conversation about here. They've got good survey data, as you recall, on the use of more transit by folks who also use our car. It's a complementary service to transit. The charging stations are available for private ownership as well. St. Paul would own the cars. St. Paul would own the charging stations. And maybe that's something we could look at as well, as to who owns them or who manages it for us. I mean, maybe we own them, or the Met Council owns them. But the notion was, as part of this conversation, shouldn't we be talking about, is there a chance here to take $4 million, for example, and say we're going to firewall this off for innovation strategies right now, and then in the future we've talked about it as a unique project before, but I like the word innovation better. We make a sort of soft commitment that in future solicitations we say we're going to take a certain percentage of our solicitation money and use it for innovation strategies, because we're all here interested in solving the practical problems of the day and trying to do as much as we can on things like safety. But I think it's also our job, and also just inherently built into all of us, is this desire to be innovative as well. That we just don't go down the track of practicality and solving these problems to the extent that we can with the constrained budget that we have. But we also should be able to do something that's innovative in the process. Now, whether we do that right now or we say, okay, next time we'll do that, I don't have any strong opinion on that. But this did at least seem to pose an opportunity to say we could be a partner with Excel. If we came up with 4 million and they came up with 4 million and the city of St. Paul ran this thing, we could see if this made sense this time. So that's a discussion for the full tab to have here. Mayor.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think you hit exactly on what the issue is. So rather than start with something that's negotiating to get our car in, I think the real question is, do we want to fund as tab a unique project? And if we do, is this the project and how much? And then you move forward in terms of, bringing that forward. I think this has an assumption that tab wants to fund this, and I'm not convinced of that based on the discussion at last month's meeting. So I think we should have that discussion first. At least in my mind, I'd like more clarity of it before we move to moving the other stuff.
I agree with that, Mayor. That's the conversation we had downstairs. It got framed up. We dove too deep, too fast.
It's presupposed too many things. It's presupposed the car and the 11%.
Yeah.
So.
So, Member Rodriguez.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I disagree with the timing. We just had all kinds of headlines about the warnings of climate catastrophe. We've got 12 years, according to the world's best scientists, to change our habits on greenhouse gas emissions. And so car sharing and transit, those are both decisions that we can make that are going to help save our planet. And so I don't think we do have the time. And it was commented on last time that this is not an innovative project. The Shared Use Mobility Center out of Chicago is administrating all the FTA projects on the safe mobility and on sharing the new mobility options and car sharing and bike sharing, et cetera. And so they are recognized by at least the FTA as the premier organization on this work, and they have issued a letter of support for this car sharing project. So I think it's demonstrated that it is innovative. Car sharing does lead to car shedding, and I don't think we do have time. These projects that we're looking at are going to be funded in 22 and 23. So thank you.
Thank you. Member Hollinshead.
I just want to make a couple points. One is we got autonomous vehicles on the near horizon, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get some applications in the next round about autonomous vehicles. And so if we have a pot of money called innovation, and we have a precedent such as our car, we'd be much better able to deal with this, what some people think is a revolution coming from that technology. I also want to again reference Member Buen's comment that transportation has come ahead of power plants now in emissions. He said in the state of Minnesota, but I think it's in America or North America. So we have a special responsibility here as a Transportation Advisory Board on climate change because it's now ahead of power plant emissions. So I just want to make those couple points.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair.
Member Valoa.
I just wanted to speak to the Our Car project. I mean, everything about it is great, in my opinion. This is why I'm here. I mean, I like everything about it. It's innovative. Minneapolis and St. Paul are together. It addresses climate change. I just think that that's the exact direction we should be heading. And I know there was a few dissenting voices at the last meeting, but the prior meeting was overwhelmingly positive. And I just wanted to emphasize that I think that, to me, when I came here today, that was what I was thinking. That's the number one thing in my head that I want to move forward out of here today.
Ms. Foster, Member Foster.
Yeah, thank you for everybody for their comments. This has been helpful. It worries me, like in the context of climate change, in the context of equity, that we're shifting the conversation into like modes and not what the goals of the Transportation Advisory Board, not what the goals of the Met Council are. I think if we sorry. I don't want us to give up on investments into public transportation that will move people who live in low-income communities, who are primarily people of color, from jobs. If we shift into modal conversations, we're just focusing on how to get like certain groups of people around and not actually into like, what are we trying to build out in our bigger communities? Moving the conversation around the orange line further down the road, keeps people out. We should be investing in public transit lines that will bring more people in. Sorry.
No,
I feel scattered about this.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Should, other thoughts, Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And we did have a really robust conversation down at TAB, and we brought up a lot of these things, and I appreciate the conversation now as well. And we did talk about, what our goals are, what we really as a TAB have been talking about, and it is regional balance. We did want to honor the scoring process that we already had in place. I mean, it's always something we should be looking at, but let's honor that a bit. We do want to honor innovation. We want to honor equity. We want to honor all of these things, and I think we should always have them at the forefront of our decision making. I think when I think about this, and we all talked about the process and how this is all framing itself out here. So the way I look at it is that we have these scenarios, which I think we all sort of want to look at. Okay, scenarios. I want to see all of them in the projects, and we have a base that we've been following, that we do refer to most often because it's easier, it's there, and it seems to be the common denominator. I think we should, in the future, look at what that base is again in a greater way. So just for the record, I think we should. But for now, we're kind of starting at the base, and what I look at is this. We'll call it the Henneman County Amendment, is an amendment to the base. It's like a written amendment. Like, okay, let's start there, and then let's tweak it here, and we just have it written down. It could have been something that morphed out of our discussion. I also remember the R-car conversation as mixed. I mean, there were some strong voices on both sides, I remember, and I think I just know that we need to move forward in innovation, and we want to have private partnerships. So I think there's something to be said for this as a precedent in both of those areas, and we should set it out, and we should set aside funding, loosely for innovation and put parameters on it. This is, I think, a good start to do that, and so I just am appreciative of the proposal that came forward, because I think it does recognize a lot of the things that we've been talking about needing around this table in as far as the regional balance, scoring process, innovation.
Member Goins?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we're right on the point of maybe being able to bring this even to a summary. I mean, we're talking together, I think, regional balance here. We're talking innovation. We do have a project, that one we're talking about here, that actually has a partner that will help us fund this. I don't know how many of those we see, and I'd almost like to use that as a model to encourage more in our strategic thinking of other ways of funding the needs that this region has. So I hear the conversation. I don't necessarily see the downside by saying this is our beta, this project. Let's look at it closely in the name of innovation, and then take a more broad look at other innovation projects in the weeks, months ahead.
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, members, thank you. I'm the alternate for Matt Look. I'll try to be a little less fire and brimstone.
We're happy to have you.
Yeah, we're glad.
It doesn't take much.
I will say, however, that the first item up here is consideration of whether to include roadway heavy as a funding scenario, because that was brought up through the TAC to be thought of here, and then whether we should do that. And now we have another one, actually a couple more. We had the one that was emailed in earlier for Mr. Hollingshead, and now one that came up from Hennepin County and downstairs, the secret room. I'm just kidding. I know it's not
You
a
can
secret.
come to those meetings. Yeah.
I've been to the meeting. I'll let you have that.
You stayed away on purpose.
Yeah.
At any rate, it's procedure here to me is really important, because the outcome's really important for the entire region. and the procedure and policies as to when something can be introduced and how it's introduced and who looks at it before we cast the final vote is really kind of important. And for TAC not to have seen all of this, for funding and programming not to have seen all of it is rather important. I feel a little uncomfortable with these. I'm not a roadway heavy guy either. I didn't think that was the right program. Because I thought that was introduced a little bit too late. I know I seem new to most of you, but I have been following this very closely. I am an alternate. I don't come to all the meetings, but I do study all the documents and tend to understand them. And I am in contact with our folks that serve on TAC in Anoka County. So with that, I mean, I'm an expansion heavy guy. I think that was the right program from the beginning, and I will listen to further comments. And I'm not one of those guys that make up my mind last week and am steadfast. I'm willing to learn. So thank you for hearing me out.
Commissioner Callison and,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
and
So
Commissioner Karwoski.
We're not making a final decision today.
No.
And we're narrowing down some options so that TAC can look at it, funding and programming can look at it. We could have come in and I could have orally made this offer today, and we would have considered it. So instead, we wrote it down and we distributed it to this group and made it available to people. It seems to me procedurally that would be the right way to do it. So I think all we're asking today is, are there one or two options? Is this the one that we want to have staff think about? It doesn't have to stay the way it is. I mean, we can talk about other ways to get to where we want to be, but have staff think about it in the meantime. And in terms of our car, I would offer that at this point, because Hennepin County is willing to defer Osseo Road and Minneapolis is willing to defer ITS, our car is being purchased, if you will, by our deferrals from Hennepin and Minneapolis. And so for the rest of you who might be not sure about whether or not this is a good thing to do, we're stepping up and saying we think it is, and we're willing to put skin in the game by going to our constituents and saying we made this choice as a priority.
All right, Elaine for
I have
staff
a
comment.
comment. Well, the direction that staff needs today is what we need to put together tomorrow morning, because we're presenting it to funding and programming for the first decision at 1:30. Yes. So we've got a quick turnaround for whatever is this.
All right, so, and our goal would be to get you can live with a couple of funding scenarios, potential funding scenarios? Okay. All right, Commissioner Karwoski.
Great
Commissioner
conversation, a lot of good input. Washington County appreciates the regional balance and everybody stepping up. It's been nice to see. You know, we've got roadway, we've got expansion, and now the suggestion of going back to the base, but including our only one project. So I want to say I appreciate that, and both, you know, obviously the cities affected in the East Metro appreciate that. Just to highlight it, it is it really is key to our transit project goal line moving forward. Interesting enough, the bridge has a pedestrian. What we're funding would be a pedestrian range and a road, so it kind of strikes all three of those. Regarding the our car, it has been a reduced dollar amount. From what I understand, the funding, the decisions on how to implement it can come a few years from now, because I think it's key to get, I had asked last meeting, and I think, so to move this forward, you know, it'd be nice to move a scenario forward with maybe some options. So like, maybe we don't have to decide on our car, but it could be further considered. It had been reduced, and like I say, the details of maybe where those charging stations don't have to be decided today, but they would later. But I had asked that, how does it specifically affect transit? Maybe that could be a little bit closer to, because I heard 28% of those riders using the hour car would get on transit. So it'd be based on where you think the stations are for charging. I think you could quantify that a little bit, or how it could affect the, you know, gold line, green line, you know, gold line of future, because we're looking for ridership. So you know, I'd like to see something move forward today that solidify some of the flexibility that's been shown, but, you know, we don't have to decide on our car, but there's been some good comments to have that further fleshed out, and I appreciate everybody looking at the regional balance, and thank you.
Commissioner Ulrich and then Member Sandal.
I'm going to suggest something to Commissioner Callison here. I would like to use this document as a framework for amending the base to include elements of this email here. Under 1, I would like to change it to favorable consideration rather than a guarantee in 2024. Item 2 unchanged. Item 3 would be MBTA would be funded at 1.5 million, and then our car would be funded at 4 million. And then everything in there I would like to be considered as a amendment to the base. If I'm going to suggest that if Commissioner Callison would consider making that amendment to the base, that'd be great. If not, I would make it. But it's your document.
Make it. I'll make it if you're willing to second.
Second.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Point of order, do we have an amendment or do
We don't have a motion.
No.
Detail.
Well, I just outlined what it would be. This document with the changes that I suggested.
And this would be potentially one of the
A
scenarios.
scenario amending the base to include these
Right, and then there'd
elements.
be a decision about the base.
The amended base
One
scenario.
base.
How about the amended base scenario?
Is that clear? Should I go through it again?
Now, go through that first part when you were talking about the number 1.
Well, number 1, it has the concept of, as it's written here, guaranteed in 2024. I would just say given favorable consideration or rather than guaranteed.
I think the language comes back next month, but I understand what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And then,
Okay, that was the only question I had, was just to
Okay.
make sure I had that thought right. So number 1, 2, the same.
That's agreeable.
MBTA would move from, they would receive, it would not be a negative, it would be a positive. They'd be funded at 1.5 million on the orange line. And then the partial funding on our car at 4 million. And then the 5 and 6 would remain as is.
Right.
That funding scenario. There's another proposed funding scenario for us to consider in January.
Correct.
And that should be in the form of a motion, I think, and then we can have more discussion. So,
yeah, Commissioner Callison made the motion. I second.
yeah, that's what I thought. I was just going
Yep.
for clarification.
Mr. Chair, there's-
Okay, because somebody said, was there a motion? That somebody said, no, it wasn't a motion, and so.
Reduced funding for our car, correct? Is
Correct,
part of that? So-
at 4 million.
4 million.
4 million. Yeah.
All right, we got a motion and a second. Now we're in discussion.
Can I get a clarification?
Oh, hold on. What?
For clarification, so the new scenario we put together would add in our cart 4 million, Ramsey County, Lexington Connection, Washington County Bridge, MBTA 1.4.
Five.
1.5. Good thing.
Yep.
And it would not show the Osseo or the Minneapolis ITS.
Correct. And there would be some language around Osseo Road to be, I'll say, vetted by our staff as well, in case I have.
That's one comment I would like to say. When these projects are selected in January, they will then be put into the TIP for approval later next year. The TIP only goes through 2023. There is no place for us to even show anything in 2024. So there would be no approval at any time on that project.
And so,
you know.
I think that's why the technical folks have to talk about this as well. So this is a recommendation, it's not a
Just to
final.
let you know.
It's a scenario.
It could be solved in the conversation about over-programming or the new
Yeah,
buzz
we'll
phrase.
program it enough to have that.
Okay, now we're in discussion on this particular scenario. Yeah, I know. Member Foster.
Yeah, my question is actually about the over-programming. So does what we just talked about, would that push the over-programming conversation into one around 11%? Or would it still be between 8 and 10? Or is that not even like?
Well, it is an issue, but I think what Commissioner Kelson is suggesting is send it to the technical people, have them compute what the over-programming would be, if anything, based on the movement of those numbers. Now, we do have some ability to run those numbers
Right now?
right now.
Yes.
We can do real-time numbers, so
Let's get 'em.
we could know that.
Yeah, we know what that is. I mean, it's a great question, and So if we exclude the Hennepin County project, Osseo Road, we stay at 8% over programming. If we include it, we add 3% additional, so we're at 11% over programming.
Got it.
Okay.
So without it.
So that's,
That
yeah,
would
that's
be,
right. And then we
that
would
be
see
the
that
guarantee
next,
that project would be funded.
we would see that next month, and that could be part of the determination as to whether the tab, what level of programming the tab wanted to be at, or they felt comfortable. All right, Member Goins, I think, was next, and then the commissioner.
Real quick here, on the number 4, the partially funding of our car, I think we just addressed a $4 million number versus the 5.2. Do we want any language in there to clarify that there is a partner, Excel Energy, that is matching that $4 million? You do not. The only reason I'm asking is that you can put more meat behind the reason that this is a good innovative project to try to move forward. We have a partner.
Yeah, I think based on historic precedent, it wouldn't be in there. It would just be an assumption that St. Paul would have to come up with their local match, so to speak. But we could consider, as I mentioned earlier, Excel would be our partner too, and thing. So, Commissioner Malushnik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support this amendment. I think this is a good way to approach this from a regional direction. I appreciate Minneapolis and Hennepin County that they're at this, if you want to say, a concession on their part. And I think this is the way we are supposed to do business. As you know, I wasn't an hour car fan, but if you're willing to, it must be important. I don't like standalone innovation. I like to have our innovation spread across all our projects, across the whole region.
True.
I'd like to see next time around, I'm sorry to be off topic, Mr. Chairman, but to spread that innovation piece across all the projects, across all the region, and hopefully that will bubble up what we really want to accomplish in the region. But be it as it may, now we're talking about a standalone, and it's not my favorite standalone, but I think I can live with it. So,
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Swanson, and then Member Tolbert, and then Member Petrick.
Okay. Last time I was not overly impressed with the St. Paul project, mainly because of the total of $6 million and the impact on regional distribution. But with what Minneapolis and St. Paul are willing to do, that eliminates my biggest problem. I'm in favor of innovation. I think this is a good project. My problem was the total cost and the impact on the region. With Minneapolis and St. Paul stepping up and eliminating that, I think it's a good project to go forward with.
Thanks, Member Swanson. Member Tolbert.
So on this motion, I just want to clarify, if we vote, which I support this amendment, this becomes our new base.
Amended base.
Well, it'd be an amended
One
base.
scenario, one of the base scenarios.
Another option.
So
One of the
next step
scenarios.
would be, if this passes, we vote on this as to go forward to next week, or to next month.
Yeah.
And then we vote on which scenario we want next.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I support this motion. I think it's a basic base scenario with people willing to give up projects that scored favorably that would get funded. It doesn't change the pace at all. It's the same thing going forward, and it should be the one that faces next month.
Thank you. Member Petrick,
Thank
then
you.
Mayor.
And I just could not let this opportunity to pass without thanking Commissioner Callison. This memo, it isn't just a memo. This took a lot of time, work, innovation, unselfish commitment to the region, and to give up what you have given up and put this forward. It is deeply appreciated. And I appreciate all the time that everyone has taken to look again at regional balance. And I certainly do, support this amendment, support this motion. And we have also learned something from this. I visited with Elaine about the time she spent with staff at Washington County, about how they're looking at projects. I think there is a new knowledge of how projects are scored, and that also the door is always open to TAB and to help should they need it. And so I know we spent enough time, and I'll stop there, but thank you very much.
Mayor.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it because that's exactly my objective in asking for the discussion on the hour card was so everybody would come to the table and have a discussion and come up with something that could move forward with the other one. So, I appreciate that. And also appreciate all the work that's gone into it because there are so many different scenarios. But, we have to be willing to put our ideas out on the table and have that full discussion. So to the end, even if the answer is not exactly the right thing, we can make some votes on what we're moving forward and all feel comfortable with it. So, Mr. Chair, thank you for opening up that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Member Sandal, we got to get you a booster chair.
I know. I think it was a wonderful discussion. I'm very appreciative of all of the members' participation and willingness to cooperate. I think it's representative democracy at its best, and I think we did a good job. My one comment would be that when you come out and figure your percentages, you've maybe just determined what your base percentage is for innovative projects. You have $4 million based on whatever your numbers are.
Could be. Could be.
Did you have your hand up too, Member Rodriguez? Anyone else? All right, Elaine, clarification here.
Just a basic quick math, if it's correct. It came up with 197 million, which is in our 8% range based on what I'm understanding. That amended to be. Oh, sorry. Okay. For my scratching math here, I came up with 197 million as the total with the amended base with the extra 4 million for the unique and the TBI project. So 197 is in that 8% range of overprogramming.
Okay, interesting. Mayor.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I too appreciate the dialogue and how it's evolved to something that appears to be something we can work forward on. The only regret I have is that 7 of us won't be here in January.
I know. Can we just do it now?
So I would
That's
ask,
why it's good
not
discussion.
as part of this amendment, but I was asked the TAB committee to consider migrating the vote from January for the next time, from January to December.
Yeah.
So that those who have invested a good bit of time in understanding and dialoguing about these have a chance to vote on it before they potentially move off the tab.
Good point.
Yeah.
Commissioner,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to call a question. Do that.
I think we're there. Yeah, all right. I don't think you even need to call it. We don't have any other comments. So, okay, all those in favor of adding the amended base into the scenarios that we're going to present to funding and programming and tax, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Now,
Mr. Chair.
got you over the line. Do we want to send anything else to funding and programming?
Well, I think that's the thing. I mean, we almost seem to have decided what the scenario is. There's some little minor things, but I don't think it's necessary to keep moving roadway heavy forward or most of the others. Most of the discussion I've heard is either base or expansion. And everything else is just, thank you very much for the information, but I don't know that you need to do much more on them.
All right.
Mr. Chair.
So, Commissioner.
I would move that we forward on expansion and base plus.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Good work. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Anything else anyone wants to entertain with sending something to the TAC or funding and programming, Commissioner?
Okay, so now I'm good that we forwarded both scenarios. I do sense that there's a majority of people here that favor one over the other. We are going to be missing 7 people. Do we not give any indication to the new tab where we come down, or we don't want to do that?
I think, just for a point of clarification here, Mayor made a good point, but I was thinking, we raised this issue before, and Elaine, correct me if I'm wrong, but you will continue to serve until your replacements are named.
Yeah.
Except for the elected officials.
Except for
I was
elected
going to
officials?
say, I think our seats end with our term.
Okay.
Metro cities will then appoint, but they take a while because I think the applications are open until January 8th. I can't remember the timeline, but I'll find out from
It'll
Patty
probably be
now.
later in
Steve is here.
Later in January, yeah.
We should make sure you guys.
All
Maybe
right.
they could sit at the table in January.
We're going to have a quorum?
Yeah, right.
Mr. Chair, I expect that those Metro Cities appointments will be made at the January board meeting, which will be the 3rd week in January.
So
Third
it's after
week.
the tab.
Yeah.
It's after tab.
It's after tab.
Yeah.
So could they stay at the table?
Well, Not if they're not in office.
No.
Mr. Peterson, I'm wondering, I've already held folks over 15 minutes beyond. Can these informational items be set over to the January meeting?
Or February?
Or what? Elaine?
Both of them are relevant to next month's decision, so I think it would be good to. They're quick.
All right, go.
The second one isn't very quick. The next one is, we did have one more clarification though, Mr. Chair, before we move on, if that's
Yeah,
okay.
but Mr. Chair, could we just, before we move on, just a few of us have a question. I just asked a question, I was just wondering if there was an answer to it, like if there was any way that we could set a priority. I just sense that the majority of people at the table, we're gonna be missing some of these votes next time, just to give the next tab board an indication of where we might be on this. Stronger version of, we're sending two scenarios forward, do we have any preference on one or the other?
No, I think we'll make those determinations in January.
Mr. Chair,
Member Tolbert.
we all have an alternate, though. Yes. And we'll be
No, but hold that thought.
okay.
Member Tolbert's next.
Okay.
I think Commissioner McGuire is right on that. I mean, as Member Gaylord was saying, we all seem to come to consensus on the base scenario. We're sending two forward, which is fine. I think the base scenario is the one we'll like to vote for, but it's the board that however many meetings in a row, you could make a recommendation that we're changing or just send one scenario forward.
No, fair point. Yep. Member Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have alternates, and so I feel like I have to let my alternate know how the conversation went today and prep her for January. So I don't think that we can vote on the issue today. We haven't.
No. Not to vote, just to get.
Not everybody has to.
No. Yeah, so I'm just trying to think, if we tell the funding and programming folks in the TAC that we have a preference, does that help, hinder, what's?
Could provide some clarification.
Yeah.
With the members changing, several have alternates.
We have a preference.
3 do not,
You have a
but their
preference for the
replacements
base.
would not be replaced till after the decision. So there would, most likely will not be anybody new sitting here. It would just be fewer.
And Mr. Chair, I don't have any I mean, I feel like we've made good votes today and we know how it's moving forward. I don't have any issue that I won't be here. And I mean, I trust this board and the work they've done, that in January when they meet, the staff will bring back these two recommendations. You'll sort through it and you'll make a good vote.
Member Hollinshead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Hennepin County for its leadership. And I want to point out that the expansion heavy does not include something very important to me as a transit user in the city of Minneapolis and in Hennepin County, the Route 6 E-line enhancement. So I would suggest that we do recommend the base with the amendment as our preference and send both of them to funding and programming tomorrow.
You want me to, you want to entertain that? You want that, make that as a motion?
Second.
I'll make that as a motion, yeah.
And we have a second discussion?
Yeah, what's the motion?
The
Motion is that the tab, do you want to restate your motion? I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, I move that we send both the amended base and the expansion heavy to funding and programming with an indication that our preference is for the amended base.
And we have a second on that, and then discussion. And
I have problem committing to either until I see the official numbers coming out from. We've done a lot of jockeying about numbers today, and I'd like to see the real numbers on a document before I vote for either one. I'm also still not certain, what did we decide on over-programming?
We haven't gotten there yet.
yeah, that'll be reflected in the numbers.
Yeah, but did we direct him to go to the 11 or go?
Could go up
No.
to.
Oh, right now it's
We
at
don't,
8.
If
we don't
it's
know.
8, we don't know.
Our assumptions right now are built off 8.
Okay.
So we need to see with the amended base, whether we're within the range of 8 or whether it would be over.
I would like him to bring back both an 8 and an 11, and then maybe we can handle the other
Chair.
project. somewhere in there.
Just to
depending how we
clarify,
see-
I think that we've set the base with the 8%. The question, I think, to going to 11 is whether or not we overprogram enough to cover the Osseo project. And maybe the 1.2 million that Dakota County is throwing into this, that no one has thanked or mentioned, on the issue of the MVTA Orange Line connector. And certainly part of a transfer, we've used a little bit of transit money to do a transit project, and I think that's the question. Do we want to overprogram to cover the things that we have, some of the things that we have?
And that's a question for January,
Right.
and a decision for January.
Mr. Chair, one thing staff seeks clarification on is the expansion heavy scenario that we're bringing tomorrow. Does that include the $4 million for our car in that, or?
No.
I don't think it does. I think it's
No, it doesn't.
standalone. Only, our car's only in the base
It's
plus,
not in there.
base plus, somebody called it. Amended base. I think it was Member Tolbert.
Helpful, thank you.
Member Reich.
I know we have this is discussion, we have a motion and a second, and my understanding of the motion was that we would be recommending something based on a year of conversation, today's in-depth conversation, and the numbers and facts we had before us.
Yeah.
And knowing as reasonable people, those things change, we haven't made a final decision, and that recommendation would pale with new facts. So if that's the intention of the author of the motion, I'm willing, when we do vote, to support it.
That would be my intent, yes.
That's, okay.
All right.
My intent.
Any further comment? All those in favor of the motion is, Commissioner. Oh, Member DeGan.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. The our car 4 million is not, is in the base plus.
Right.
It's not being drawn out, we're not asking funding and programming to specifically work on this, or just, calculate it, or, we seem to have gotten lost a lot.
Well, Elaine, I think, can explain what funding and programming can do with these two scenarios.
One has it in,
was,
one doesn't.
We have the expansion heavy scenario is the one that you have on it. We'll go forward. Plus we'll bring, and that one will not have the hour cars shown.
Right.
And then the base plus will show the hour cars, one of the projects. And then
We'll have new numbers.
Yeah.
For that scenario.
we'll total it up so we know.
Mr. Chair,
Sorry, please.
No.
I was just going to comment. I won't be supporting the motion because I think the technical advisory committee is just that. They're advising on technical merits only. They really shouldn't be concerned what our feelings are on this. And I want them to, and the funding and programming should be looking at this, and it should come back to us. They should look at both of them, and they should make a recommendation to us. I don't think we should be recommending to them, so I'll be voting against the motion.
Member Tolbert had his hand up.
Can I make an amendment to the motion?
Oh, my.
I would say that the motion is that we go forward with base plus with board recommendation from this board to the next tab board. That's our suggestion, pending numbers, and that they also look at expansion heavy and bike ped heavy.
No, that just.
Oh, is there a second?
Second.
No. Let's proceed.
Oh, sorry, okay. Well, I just want, okay, let me, sorry, Mr. Chair.
This would fail for the lack of a second.
Okay, I know, but I want to, okay, then let me make another vote, okay, I won't second that, but I'll withdraw my second, but then can you call on me? I'll withdraw my second, but I want to call.
Yeah, no, don't, you can't comment on it, because he's looking for a second on that motion where he wants to add ped, you want to add ped bike heavy?
Well, but as a third scenario, because I mean, if we're not going to do base plus, my second choice would be bike ped heavy. It wouldn't be
All right.
go all the way.
I'll second that.
Okay,
Okay, now we're
then
gonna
I
have
would,
three.
as-
So we're gonna have three
That's
now.
an amendment, right? So
That's an amendment.
I'm the motion maker,
Right.
Mr. Chair. Can I speak to that?
Yeah, you can speak, we're speaking now to the proposed amendment.
The amendment is second.
I couldn't be more in favor of bike ped as a value,
Yeah.
but I want to note that the transit amount under bike ped is substantially less
Yeah.
than the transit amount under expansion heavy or base plus. And so if I have to make a Solomon's choice here, I would oppose your amendment because of the much less amount for transit under bike ped. So, with regret, I oppose the amendment.
Mr. Chair, my reason for the second, this is my first year going through this process. I just joined this tab board, I don't know, 8 months ago, however long it's been, but this is all very overwhelming, but it's informative. But I would like to see at least those 2 scenarios come back. But adding a third one, for my purpose, maybe I'm a little selfish here, for a learning process. And if we do have some new members that are going to be coming on, I think it'll be helpful for them too. But I would like to see these 3 come forward and agree with
Commissioner
Schulte, your name's not on the back, that it follow a procedure. And maybe this seems redundant to a lot of you guys that have been doing it for a long time, but it is helpful for me to learn more of this process and how it works.
Anybody else want to speak to the amendment? Opposed, Madam Commissioner?
I need to clarify this. We have a third proposal?
It's just the
No, we have a
third.
We have a second amendment.
We just
doesn't know
have
what
a
the
motion with
amendment
some amendments.
Amendment
So
with-
we'll vote on the motion.
We have an amendment that includes 3 proposals.
Right. This third one, this latest amendment takes Washington County, I mean, less than a 0.2%. It hasn't even been discussed. I don't see why at the 11th hour of this discussion today, when we haven't discussed PED, what are we, PED heavy? Now we're bringing it in for further consideration. Are we really been putting any kind of strength in our recommendation forward? This kind of,
Member Tolbert?
I'm going to withdraw my amendment. I'm going to withdraw my amendment to amendment, but I will say it with this point.
Yeah.
Because
No.
there's consensus around the base plus, and we can add other scenarios, but we should just go forward with the one that has
Yes.
generally universal
Yes.
consensus
Right.
of base
Yes.
plus rather than 2 scenarios or 3 scenarios
Right.
that are just going to be staff spending time on them. And I don't think have as much merit as the base scenario. That seems to be the sweet spot that we've been able to bring together at this point.
Vote on it.
But I will make that, I will withdraw the amendment, but I just want to make that point on the bike.
This seconder, feel comfortable? Can you get your education some other way?
Absolutely.
Member Tolbert, you are Mr. Mischief.
It's the end of the year.
He's also my city
Elf.
councilman.
All right, we're back to the main motion now.
Which is?
Member
To clarify,
Rodriguez.
I thought I heard something about there would be a recommendation from Funding and Programming and TAC. My understanding is that we would make a recommendation on what scenarios to look at, and that the Funding and Programming and TAC will just talk about pros and cons with each.
Right.
That's my understanding of the process.
Yes,
That's right.
that is correct, the motion that I made.
Yeah, that's correct. Okay, give it another try here.
Better restate it.
You better tell us what's
Yeah.
left. in
Oh,
this.
no, you want me to remember?
Mr. Hellman said.
Mr.
we
Chair, because it
Yes,
really
we
doesn't
didn't vote.
matter to TAC what our
Right,
preference
right.
is. And you've got
We get rid of it.
dozens of people here that have been through this conversation that will all be here in the January meeting to make this pitch. We don't have to make a motion to tell TAC what we think at this point, because it really doesn't matter to TAC. TAC just wants to know which
two?
various scenarios you want them to take
Information.
another look at, and if there's number changes. So I'm not sure why the motion is here at all.
Well,
and
that's
what-
we'll have the motion restated. We got a motion and a second.
The motion is to forward these 2, the base plus, plus the expansion heavy,
They already did that.
to funding and programming, which is the destination here, rather than TAC, I think. And the reason I made the motion is because under expansion heavy, we do not have the Route 6 E-line improvements And that is a very important priority, I think, not only for me as a transit rep, but for quite a few others. And something that,
Chair?
without which we are delaying the progress of our
Kind of
transit
move this
system.
along. So basically, we're just telling them the two scenarios are going forward. We're not making recommendations and we're not making.
Well,
No, his, embedded in his motion was a preference for base plus.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think that should be there.
Well,
So
yeah,
if I
well,
need to
he's-
amend
we got a
it,
motion
I
and a
will-
We got a
second.
motion, a second call.
You can vote against it if you want.
Yep.
Mayor, let's get this voted on.
Yeah, just from a process standpoint, I think the secretary can tell us, but I think we already voted on a motion to advance base and amendments and expansion. I don't think,
So what are we doing?
with all due respect, Matthew,
Yeah.
your conversation
He
is
didn't
valuable
mention
in
that.
January,
Yeah.
not valuable right now, because we're already sending, I think don't we already have a motion? Is that correct? It already passed?
We've already sent the two to.
We've already passed the motion.
We've got that done. We don't,
He wants to
Preference that
emphasize.
Mr. Allenstead is suggesting is let's add a preference to it.
That's right.
Which I believe is unnecessary. That's a preference that will be made known in January when those two
Call the
scenarios are
question.
brought back.
everybody understand the motion?
Call Kate. Motion is, whether or
The
not.
motion is whether we should indicate, or you want to indicate there's a preference for base plus to the Funding and Program Committee. Member Rodriguez?
Yeah, I want to
Consider
speak in support of the motion
your
because I
project in
think that
either
there
of
was a
these
strong preference
scenarios.
for today.
Yeah.
And there is going to be a lot of turnover in the tab.
All right,
So,
okay, here we go. All those in favor of the motion indicating preference, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Hand vote, all those in favor?
Make it interesting.
So it's the outstay.
You got two? 17, okay, opposed?
No, close.
Motion passes. 12.
Yeah.
Good idea, too late. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I had my hand up.
Now I'm voting against your debate next time.
This is one big democracy.
Cookies. We are.
Yeah, what are we gonna do now with you, Mr. Peterson?
And Jenny.
You don't need those. We can table those two items.
All right, we've got, apparently we got cookies outside the door, and we're gonna reconvene out there, and we're gonna have more democracy than you can handle. All right, have a great holiday, everybody. We stand adjourned. Great work. Great work, everybody.
My dad's out there.
You did great work. That was good, Jim.
Have a happy
I think people are good. They're just reminding